Welcome to the Total Boss Podcast, and I'm your host, Christiano Green, a podcast where we talk about finding fulfillment through self-development, being a leader of your own life, and getting the most out of it as well. Tenacity, originality, talent, authenticity, and being legendary. It's all about living your best life. Hello, all you total bosses out there, and welcome to another episode of the Total Boss Podcast. I am your host, Christiano Green, and I am a relationship coach for gay men, helping them find and create long-lasting, loving relationships with partners as well. Now, this week on the podcast, I really wanted to jump in and talk about trauma bonding. Now, a lot of people I speak to, throughout the days in my career, in my business and in life, often have a misunderstanding of what trauma bonding is. Now, what most people think it is they think that it is kind of, a bond that is formed between friends, partners, people who can relate to trauma. Maybe they've either gone through the same traumatic event or they've gone through similar traumatic events and they can bond and connect through it. Now, that is actually not really what trauma bonding is. And I'll really jump in and get into what trauma bonding is because it can happen a lot to people in life. Now, it can happen, in relationships with, a loving relationship, a romantic relationship. It can happen with your parents, siblings. It can happen with, friendships, people at work. It can happen quite a lot. So really what trauma bonding is, it's really, an attachment, that, an abused person feels for their abuser. Specifically, it's done in a relationship with, cyclical, patterns of abuse. The kind of bond is, created due to cycles of abuse and then positive reinforcement. So, when abuse happens after each circumstance of the abuser actually then, will profess their love, their regret, and will often try to make the relationship feel safe and needed for the victim, right? Now, trauma bonding is going to be one reason why leaving this abusive situation really then feels confusing and overwhelming because it involves positive and or loving feelings that the victim has for the abuser, which makes the abused person feel attached to and really dependent on their abuser. So it's really just about really making, it often comes from people who are, narcissistic or who have that kind of personality that will really then, put their ways of attachment and, abuse into their victims. And oftentimes people necessarily who are people who are doing it, for example, who are the abusers, they've often probably been through it as the victim on the other side throughout their life. So usually what will happen is someone, maybe it's with their parents to a child. What will happen is when that child goes into a relationship, if they haven't really worked through it, they'll often end up becoming the abuser in that regard. So it becomes a cycle there. And this is why, if you're someone who's been through it, maybe you're in it right now, or you've been through this kind of toxic relationship in the past, it's important to get the right help because you don't want to continue this and maybe then, be on the other side of it. You become the abuser instead of being the victim, which is probably what might have happened to you in the past. And again, you may be listening to this and you may realize that maybe you are the abuser. So it's also important that, you can right your wrongs, you can grow from this, you can move past it. You just have to find the right people to get support from. So let's talk a little bit more about how this happens and how it affects us and what we can kind of do to move past it, because there are a lot of triggers that make people risk factors for being susceptible to trauma bonding, right? So people who have, dependent personalities, right? Like we talked about it. If you're someone who feels very dependent on people, you might have codependency in your DNA, I guess, your relationship DNA. You're going to be more likely to fall a trap to this because you're when you get into relationships, maybe you're feeling like very dependent on those people. So then you become easily a victim to trauma bonding. Right? Someone else who may be susceptible is, people who put a lot of value on the good times. and easy to and quick to forgive, right? You focus on, the good parts of the relationship, but you kind of turn a blind eye to the bad parts of the relationship, right? So when something might happen, you let it slide because you remember all of the great things that happen in life. Oh, what about that time we went on that date? It was amazing. It was an amazing date. I loved it. And then you forget about all the 6 other days in the week where it was not so good, right? Now, other people could be that, you might have history, like I said, of being abused in childhood or past relationships. If you've got that history of it, then you're likely to feel like this is ways that people are to be treated. Maybe this is how relationships should be. So if you've got that, then you're going to say, well, maybe this is what might happen with my parents, so this is maybe how it's supposed to be. You then become more likely to fall into traps of being, trauma bonding. Maybe you've already gone through that in the past as well, right? You might also suffer from separation anxiety, which often comes, and build up from childhood, right? You have a fear of being on your own or separation from people who love you. So then you attach yourself to people who will give you that love, but then obviously, maybe not in the way that's really healthy at all, right? And then also people who are super sensitive to rejection may also be likely to fall into these kinds of trauma bonds as well, because if you're, sensitive to it, then you're more likely that it's going to happen around you as well, right? These are kind of things that happen. So what are some of the signs or the symptoms of trauma bonding, right? So thinking about it like this, if you're someone who is the victim, more likely or not that you're covering up or making excuses to other people about, the abuser's behavior. So if the abuser's treating you in a certain way, you make excuses or you cover up what's happening to other people around you so that it doesn't seem like a big deal, right? Same thing is you're probably likely to lie to your friends or family about abuse. You're not going to talk about it, or you're going to say something happened. Like, if you've been, physically or sexually assaulted, you might make up a different story about what's really happened so that you don't, you don't alarm people about what's really going on, right? Now, what else can happen is that, as the victim, you don't feel comfortable with, or, you don't feel comfortable being able to leave that situation. It feels very overwhelming. It feels very anxiety ridden. It feels very scary. So those kinds of feelings make you still feel like you need to be in that. It feels very hard for you to leave, because again, another thing is that you're going to think that sometimes it's your fault, because throughout it, we're going to talk in a minute all the different things that happen, but like there's a lot of gaslighting in there as well. And when you get those types of things, it plays with your mind. And again, depending on where you have grown up with your own relationships with your parents or other people who are key in your life, if you see that these are things that have happened to you in the past and you fall into it again, because it's likely that happens, then what will happen is that you again start to blame, this is me. I've done this. This is what happened to my parents. They did this to me. With my friends, they did this to me. With my partner, he's doing it to me. Or my previous partner, I deserve this, right? Because you've gone through it so many times in the past, right? So let's kind of jump through and talk about what are the stages of trauma bonding. So number one, you've got love bombing, right? Now, what is love bombing? This kind of involves a sudden, intense attempt to create a we in a relationship, through high praise, excessive flattery. And while this dynamic, typically occurs between, the abuser and the victim, it can oftentimes involve other people surrounding the couple. So there are sometimes in abusive situations where the abuser may seem oblivious to any manipulation that they have going on. However, that, is typically not the case in trauma bonds. In trauma bonds, love bombing really is subtly setting the stage for an abusive dynamic by, allowing the abuser to prey on the victim's emotions, their hopes, their desires, their dreams. It is similar to someone saying, look what I can offer you, and no one else has or will love you like this, right? Those types of things are really trying to have you creating this love bond, right? It also is, causing the victim to let their guard down and trust the abuser's intentions. It's also fostering positive feelings and validations between the possible perpetrator and the victim. And it's proving that an abuser has good intentions by providing a sense of stability and security. So it's just really about making you feel like there's this need for that person in your life and you can't live without them. So it's really kind of making you, it's slowly taking jabs away at your self-esteem, one by one by one by one, to the point where you feel like there's this need. And it's a we. When there's a relationship, there's three parts of the relationship. There's you, there's them, and there's us, right? Whereas this is just talking about the us part. You're out of the equation, right? Because your self-esteem starts to be ripped to shreds as well. Now, the next stage is all about trust and dependency. Now, in this stage, the abuser is going to purposefully test the victim's trust and their dependency on them, which is, going to lead to the victim feeling guilty for questioning their partner. There's going to be doubts that are going to come in that are expected in healthy relationships, and it takes time to get to know someone, not only for what they say, but also for what they do. So when the victim might be confronting the abuser at this stage, you might find that there's a lack of, discounting your credibility, right? Discounting, all they've done for you, which is why the love bombing stage provides that vital setup for this dependency, right? Because in the trauma bonds, the idea that you can trust an abuser in the relationship becomes an illusion, right? It's all about testing you, right? It's all about making sure that, if you do question them, that you start to feel bad for questioning them. Like, look at all the things that I've done for you. Look at what our love for is about. Again, it continues to bring down the self-esteem and creates that dependency, the codependency that you have. And like I said, really strengthens that love bombing bond that happens as well. So the next stage moves into criticism. So once, the abuser's got the victim's trust, emotional abusers may start to pick apart some of your own qualities. So really going to be identifying them as insignificant or problematic. And this criticism can really feel sudden, especially after experiencing the love bombing stage, right? But it is common for abusers to wait until, the victim really trusts the abuser and has been tested before they can begin to criticize them. Because this phase is really noticeable during intense arguments or disagreements where the abuser is going to really blame the victim and really going to make you as the victim end up over apologizing for things that are really not their fault. You might start to think along the lines of, wow, he still loves me and forgives me even when I mess up. Oh, wow, you're right. I'm so sorry for questioning you. Or you want what's best for me, so you're right. It's this kind of back and forth dance of harsh criticism and over apologizing, which is the glue for forming the real trauma bonding, right? And that's really what happens in this criticism stage. Again, it's further reducing your self-esteem, taking you, block by block away to the point where you move into the stage which is next, which is manipulation and gaslighting. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but really, these two things are forms of psychological abuse, which are often seen in trauma bonds that will ultimately make victims question their reality and perception. Because gaslighters will never fully or honestly take any responsibility for their behaviors, and they tend to really shift all the blame onto the victim. And it is very common for gaslighters to suddenly seem calm, cool, and collected once they've been pushed, once they push their target to the breaking point. Really, gaslighting is a textbook behavior among common types of abusers, especially, like narcissists or sociopaths or psychopaths, right? Because the idea is that, when the victim fights back or challenges the abuser, that can often feel like it will never result in anything good, which sometimes leads to reactive abuse, by the abuser. This term refers to, seemingly abusive behaviors committed by the abuser towards the victim, when it comes to rage, or psychological preservation. What it is it's really normal for victims who engage in this kind of abuse to feel extremely guilty and concerned when their behavior turns physical, leading the target of abuse to further question their own identity, primarily because the gaslighting type of abuse really seeks to isolate the target from anything and anyone that gives them a sense of reassurance or normalcy or independence as well. So really what's happening here is it's really, in this stage, it's all about making you feel like, the blame for everything, that you're crazy for even thinking that that person's done anything wrong, and really start to question yourself, and you start to feel really shamed and guilty, and then, you feel you can't talk to anyone else because, wow, like I'm really losing it. And if I say this, people are going to think I'm crazy or no one's going to believe me. And you start to lose it. Like I said, you might, again, start to go into those rage things as well. And then, like I said, the other person's really quite calm and you go, wow, like I'm really losing it here. So it's really designed to make you to question yourself a lot, right? And the people around you. So the next stage is the resignation and the giving up stage. So when really dealing with trauma bonds, it is very common for, the victims to start giving in at some point to avoid any more conflict. This kind of fawn trauma response or bargaining and people-pleasing behaviors, may ensure that the relationship can remain somewhat stable because the targets may have some awareness they are being manipulated, but that small awareness may not be enough to really exit the relationship yet because the victim is still questioning whether or not they are to blame for, the abuser's behavior. Depending on the length of the relationship and the nature of the abuse, especially the psychological abuse, the victims often becomes more dependent on the abuser to avoid further conflict by getting married, having children, or becoming more emotionally and financially reliant on their partner. There are many reasons why the abused person cannot easily leave, including safety concerns. And obviously, it's really natural to fear that an abuser's behavior may escalate when they sense they are losing control, especially when the victim is threatening to leave or actually walking out of the door. So, throughout this period, it might have moved from psychological to physical abuse as well. And maybe there's threats there that maybe it could be, domestic disputes or even like threats on that livelihood or life. So it becomes to this point where you're almost feeling completely stuck. I'm afraid to say anything to anyone. I'm afraid to do anything because what happens means that I'm going to do something. I'm at fault here, right? This is the thing. And again, further taking those blocks away of self-esteem. Next part is loss of self. So throughout the stages of a trauma bond, there is, a huge loss of self, and which this is going to bring tremendous pain and disconnection from the world we once know. So this is really about almost you're at the rock bottom of your self-esteem. People who leave abusive relationships may not seem like their selves due to loss of their own identity and personal boundaries, right? Trauma bonds can be incredibly isolating, right? Meaning that you've probably pushed away everyone else in your life because of what the abuser's done to you. So you might have really minimal or zero social connections. And, due to the changes of self-identity that really no longer match what people close to you are used to, this kind of level of psychological destruction can and often leads to a complete loss of confidence and then even at worst, suicidal ideation. So for many people, this emotional torture, shame, and guilt can often be built up for years and years and years. And again, depending on your level of trauma bonds and if it's happened in the past, it could be decades, right? Which can really make it very difficult to face and move forward from. So the final kind of stage is the addiction to the cycle. Because often in trauma bonds, the stages can be cyclical, especially after a significant conflict. There may be a cool down or honeymoon period where it's really good again. And at this moment of peace, the abuser might apologize and start the love bombing process all over again, which really makes the target feel relieved and desired, which is, really positive reinforcement. And then, reinforcing that dependency on the abuser as well. So, what happens is the abuser may completely shut down, become avoidant, and withhold all love, affection, and attention as a way to pressure or force the victim to apologize. Now, when the responsibility and blame become pinned on the victim, they may go to extremes to really gain back, that love from the abuser. So by doing so, the target is falsely given the sense that they have control and they may be drawing conclusions that the abuser must really love them when they succeed at winning them back, which is going to continue to reinforce the idea that the victim is to blame. So it's really huge to really see this here, because again, these things just become a cycle. Again, you might start at the love bombing stage, go through to the trust and dependency, then to criticism, then to manipulation and gaslighting, resignation and giving up, complete loss of self, and then again we will go back to the beginning and go again. Because again, as you get to a place where you want to leave or move away or step away from it, you really it's building that cycle, right? And again, this can go on for years and years and years. And what it really does to people is that, people develop chronic illnesses in their body, right? What's going on upstairs creates physical chronic illnesses in your body, which could be, chronic fatigue. It could mean depression. It can mean emotional distress, panic attacks, dissociation, fatigue, brain fog, sleep issues, flashbacks, avoidance, real things that happen, right? Isolation. All of this stuff is what will happen to the brain and the body to move through it, and ways of coping with it. Because a lot of this is coping mechanism, because your brains are overloaded and overwhelmed constantly, right? In fear mode, and in like, what the fuck's going on mode as well, right? So what are some things you can do to break the bond? Number one is, if you're going to get out of it and move away from it or resolve it, you need to first plan for your safety, right? If you have got no one that you can trust in your life because maybe you pushed them away, speak to, domestic violence hotlines. There are those for LGBT communities that are all around the world, reach up and call those types of people, because again, this is a way for you to be able to talk to someone, without them really knowing you or stepping in, where you can start to seek some advice. So creating a plan. If you've got other people in life who you can reach out to, maybe, sharing this with someone that you really trust, maybe a family member or a friend or a colleague, depending on your situation, where you can just say like, I need some help, right? Finding someone where you can, so you can plan your exit from this as well. And again, this will be hard, because the idea is that you've got this bond, the trauma bond. So getting to this point, really, you have to be strong. You have to really trust that you have to get away from this, right? And so it's going to be hard. So sharing and getting more information about this stuff is key. Next is, therapy or coaching, right? Now, when you're in this point, you need to speak to a professional who can help you move past trauma. I'm a master in NLP, and we've got a lot of techniques that I use with my clients to help them move past trauma, because getting past the trauma is the first step to really, breaking the bond. Because if you're still in that, even if you've gotten out, a lot of times they say, I think it's, 70+% of people go back to the abuser after they've left because of that bond, because they feel like that's the only person that's going to love them, or this, or right. And so it causes that. So getting some help from a coach, especially people who can deal with trauma, is key for you to be able to move past it as well. Now, next is positive self-talk and care. Just having a lot of self-care for yourself, really speaking kindly to yourself, doing the best you can each day, taking it one day at a time. That's hard to say, but, if you really focus on it, knowing that some days it's not going to be easy, but giving yourself grace, giving yourself compassion, and, really allowing yourself to do what feels right for you. If that means you need to, take some time out in life and just spend some time alone, as long as it's healthy time alone, that's fine. If you need to be around people, be around people. It really depends on the person. A lot of times it's going to be hard for you to be around a lot of people, because you're going to feel very overwhelmed, and maybe like everyone's looking at you like something's wrong with you, but know that there's nothing wrong with you. This is what the person's done to you. You are a victim, right? And finally, there are things like support and peer groups. So maybe speaking to other people who've been through exactly what you've been through, who are victims in these areas, and talk about what they've done, their experiences, so you can relate to and go, well, that's how it happened for me, right? The more you get awareness of this trauma bonding and how abuse works and how the cyclical it is, you'll realize you're not crazy. You were pushed to this place, right? This can happen, right? And for you to move past it, maybe speaking to some people who've been through it, is just a great way for you to have, releases and emotional responses that you're not flawed, right? You can move past this. So really, at the end of the day, I don't know what your experience is. If you've had this, like I said, this could be a cycle where you've been through multiple abuses, whether it could be from parents, could be from siblings, could be from friends, could be from romantic partners, could be from people at work. I know I've been through specific things in workplaces where I felt like I've been through, some of this stuff, not on a deep level in a romantic relationship, but certainly, on some smaller degrees. More people are susceptible than others, which is a shame. And really to move past it, it takes, an awareness and a readiness. And like I said, most important is planning your safety if you're in this as well. And if you've been in the past and you want to get through it, reach out to someone you trust, especially someone who may be, an expert in helping people through trauma, and probably an expert in gay relationships as well, because it's key for people to be able to connect to the person who's going to help you. If you're getting coaching or therapy, find someone who you can trust, who's probably relatable, who might have understand completely the experience that you're going through as much as they can, or they're going to really be able to sympathize and give you some good advice to work through that. All right. I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear your questions. If you want to reach out to me privately about your own experience with it, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram. I love hearing from you guys, and it's never too much to reach out to me and share your story, because this is how we get through it. This might be the first step for you to take to get past it. And you might need some help. So reach out, send me a message, share your story, because this is the first step. All right, guys, I'll be back next week. I trust you've loved this episode. Always remember that you've got this and I've got you.